Hare Krishna, you're on the mute, Niket.
Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udiraye Srinvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shavana Kirtana Hridayanta Stohi Abhadrani Vidonoti Sahit Satam Nashta Prayeshu Abhadresu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavate Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. So, Krishna everyone, today we will be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 5, starting from verse 22. Akram yorasi dakshasya sita dharena hetina chindana petaduddartam nasa notrayam bhaktastada. Translation by His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Then Virabhadra, the giant-like personality, sat on the chest of Daksha and tried to separate his head from his body with sharp weapons, but was unsuccessful. The next verse 23. Shashtrastra viterevam anirbhina tvachamhara vishmayam paramapano dadhyo pushupatischiram. Translation. He tried to cut the head of Daksha with hymns as well as weapons, but still it was hard to cut even the surface of the skin of Daksha's head. Thus Virabhadra was exceedingly bewildered. Verse 24. Drishtva samyapanam yogam pashunam sapatirmake yajamana pashokasya kaya tena harat shira. Translation. Then Virabhadra saw the wooden device in the sacrificial arena by which the animals were to have been killed. He took the opportunity of this facility to behead Daksha. Purport. In this connection, it is to be noted that the device used for killing animals in the sacrifice was not designed to facilitate eating their flesh. The killing was specifically intended to give a new life to the sacrificed animal by the power of Vedic mantra. The animals were sacrificed to test the strength of the Vedic mantras, and yajnas were performed as a test of the mantra. Even in the modern age, tests are executed on animal bodies in the physiology laboratory. Similarly, whether or not the Brahmanas were uttering the Vedic hymns correctly was tested by sacrifice in the arena. On the whole, the animals thus sacrificed were not at all the losers. Some old animals would be sacrificed, but in exchange for their old bodies, they received other new bodies. That was the test of Vedic mantras. Virabhadra, instead of sacrificing animals with the wooden device, immediately beheaded Daksha to the astonishment of everyone. So this concludes the reading. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Savi Gaura Bhaktarinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So thank you everyone so much for joining. I would like to seek the blessings from all the assembled Vaishnavas here. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to purify myself. And I'm not at all qualified to speak, so please forgive me if I have any shortcomings or make any mistakes. So without further ado, I'll get started. So first, we see that in these three verses, I know many devotees would have already summarized the story that goes on between Daksha, Sati, and Lord Shiva. So I will just go over some of the aspects that Lord Shiva is portraying here, and then I will move on to speaking about Vedic sacrifice, which Prabhupada gave a purport for in the last verse. So one aspect of Lord Shiva's personality is his anger. He exhibits anger as a part of his position as the destroyer of the universe. But we see that his anger, however, is born out of his compassion, as well as his intolerance to seeing conditioned souls wasting time by not taking devotional service. So, in this particular episode of the fourth canto, we see that Lord Shiva is exhibiting his anger towards Daksha, who is a leading progenitor in the universe. And although Daksha insulted Shiva at this great sacrifice, we see that Shiva's anger is not aroused because Daksha insulted him, but it's rather because Daksha later caused the death of Sati, who was his own daughter and Shiva's dear devoted wife. So when Shiva heard from Narad Muni that Sati was now dead because of Daksha insulting her, Shiva becomes immensely angry and creates Virabhadra from his hair, and then orders him to kill Daksha. So the events that we see taking place now is as a result of that anger, where Shiva wants to protect uh, his beloved associates and devotees. So, as a dutiful father and spiritual master of all beings, Lord Shiva uses his anger to rectify people. And in this context of the Daksha episode, he later tells Lord Brahma that he doesn't take the offenses of the demigods seriously. So the anger we see here is not as if Shiva is actually being affected by it. And Lord Shiva says this himself. He doesn't take the offenses of demigods seriously, but he punishes them only to reform them as a teacher. And this is actually said later on in 4.7.2. But I just wanted to give some context right now about that. And in this way, Lord Shiva uses his anger in the service of the Lord to rectify the living beings, and it's never for his own ends or for his own gratification. So now I will move on to what Prabhupada wanted to touch on these four verses, which was Vedic sacrifice. So I'll start with a verse from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 5, text 18. The humble sage, by virtue of true knowledge, sees with equal vision a learned and gentle Brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog eater. So one of the four regular principles of devotional service requires us to abstain from eating meat, fish, or eggs. And meat eating uh, also involves unnecessarily violence towards animals. So anyone who stays away from such food, they will avoid all the negative karma that comes and is associated with it. So understanding this, living a simple and non-violent lifestyle is how we can actually concentrate all of our time and energy into God realization. But we will still find that the concept of animal sacrifice is still very prominent in the scriptures of all major religions. Like we even see in the Bible that there's a detailed list of which animals can be sacrificed and how they can be offered. And similarly, even in Vedic literature, there we see that there are many such animal sacrifices. And in these sacrifices, the performer is rewarded with certain material benedictions. And this may arise a few questions within us because we can see that non-violence isn't really practiced here. So it seems contradictory. So first, let's go through a few examples. During Lord Krishna's time on earth, we see during the Mahabharata, King Yudhishthira, he performed the sacred Ashwamedha sacrifice. And this sacrifice involves killing a horse. And even before that, in the Treta Yuga, uh, King Dashrath also performed the sacrifice. And it was performed by many kings with the idea of uh, acquiring good karma for the king and for his kingdom. So we see that Dashrath sacrifice bore fruit in the form of Lord Ram, who is Krishna himself, and he was born as his first son. And of course, that's not the reason why Lord Ram appeared, but during the Leela, we see that uh, the fruits of the animal sacrifice is shown. So the performance of all these sacrifices seem to contradict the principle of no meat eating. But we know that this type of animal sacrifice bears no resemblance to the violence we see today against animals in modern day slaughterhouses and the extent that animals are being harmed just for human consumption. And the Vedas are somewhat complex, and they have different dharmas or religious duties which are assigned to different classes of people. And since the material world is a place governed by gunas, or the different qualities such as goodness, passion, and ignorance, every living entity has a different level of intelligence. And this results in varying capacities for different people to understand the scriptural injunctions and processes. So even though Bhagavata Dharma, which we all know is loving service to Krishna, is the highest form of religion, we still see that there are other forms of religion which allow everyone to make some sort of spiritual advancement, even if it's not on the level of Bhagavata Dharma. So below the system of Bhagavata Dharma, there is a religious system that involves the four rewards of life. So these four rewards that are often pursued are by those who are religiously inclined to generally seek the rewards of Dharma, which is religiosity. And there's Artha, which is economic development, Kama, which is sense gratification, and Moksha, which is liberation. So to achieve these benedictions, there is a section of the Vedas which is known as Karma Kanda. And Karma Kanda has been referred to many times in Srila Prabhupada's purports. And we even see that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he spreads the message of Krishna consciousness in the age where Karma Kanda was at its peak. So it's in this portion of the Vedas where one will find all these various animal sacrifices being performed by kings in the past. So the idea wasn't to allow meat eating, but for simple sense gratification, but it was to sanction violence in a regulated manner, which would be both beneficial to the performer and the animal sacrificed. So in a sacrifice properly performed by qualified brahmanas, where the mantras were perfectly recited, the living entity inside the animal would immediately be rewarded a higher birth in the next life. Now, this is one of the important points that Srila Prabhupada touches on in the purport, that the animal would actually be given a higher birth in the next life. And an even more important aspect of this is that the brahmanas were qualified. So unless these two factors are taking place, the violence is not uh, very approved, I guess. And we know that in this yuga that is not possible. But we will touch on that later. There's a few Prabhupada quotes where he explicitly says this. So going on, the performer naturally he would immediately receive the material rewards that they were seeking after. And naturally, such a religious system, I'm going to repeat again, is less than Bhagavad Dharma, but it was still performed as a way of allowing kings to make gradual elevation in spiritual consciousness. And the Kshatriyas generally live in the mode of passion, which is Rajoguna. And due to this fact, they're allowed to, we see in the Mahabharata, gamble and even hunt and go hunting as a way of practicing their defensive skills. And although this is true, unnecessary violence towards animals was never condoned. And we can see that there are many examples of this and many historical incidents which are mentioned in the Vedic texts of kings being punished for uh, times when they do do unnecessary violence towards other living entities in the forest. So we see that the same King Dashrathi once accidentally shot and killed a young boy with his arrow while going hunting in the forest. And since the boy that he killed, their parents would eventually, die from the grief resulting from the untimely death of their son, they cursed King Dashrath to suffer the same fate in the future. So for this reason, King Dashrath died after the exile of his eldest and most beloved son, Lord Ram. So now I'll read a short quote by Srila Prabhupada from a lecture in Los Angeles. In the Vedic literature, there are numerous prescriptions of sacrifice, and in some of the sacrifices, animal sacrifice is also recommended. So that animal sacrifice does not mean to kill the animal. Animal sacrifice means to prove the strength of Vedic hymns so that one old animal is put into the fire and he's given again a renewed life, just to show the potency of the hymns, Vedic hymns. But in this age, Kali Yuga, those sacrifices are forbidden. So we see here another aspect of the sacrifices explained by Srila Prabhupada, that these sacrifices were a means of testing the brahmanas who would preside over them. And it's also a way of benefiting the animal that's being sacrificed. And the entire purpose in the end was completely aimed at providing purification. So these sacrifices were performed during the previous yugas, where Dharma had a stronger presence in society than it does now. And according to the Vedas, we see that Dharma gradually declines amongst the population as the time goes on. And they say in the current Kali Yuga, uh, Dharma only has 25% of the strength compared to what it had in the beginning of creation, which was 100%. So with this decline in religion, uh, there also comes, the tainting of these sacrifices. The sacrifices aren't performed properly. And brahmanas were no longer pure, so they weren't performing them for purification either. But it was merely an excuse to eat animal flesh. And we see Bhakti Sundar Maharaj, he always speaks about this one story of the brahmanas he saw near the Ganga eating fish. And he would ask them, why they're doing so, and they would reply that it was Ganga Prasad. So just how sacrifices are an excuse for brahmanas or just people in general to enjoy material gratifications, even at the cost of other living entities like eating animals. We see that in that story, the brahmanas also make that excuse just to eat fish. And there's actually no purified reason behind it. So I will read one more quote by Prabhupada. This is in a room conversation in Tokyo. When there was too much animal sacrifice in India, Lord Buddha appeared. And in the Vedas, there is recommendation for animal sacrifice in some sacrificial ceremony, but not ordinarily. And that sacrifice is meant for testing the power of chanting mantra. An animal would be put into the fire, and it would come again with a renewed life. In this way, there is recommendation in the Vedas that some animals, but people misunderstood it. People began to slaughter. So Krishna advented as Lord Buddha specifically to stop the degraded process of animal slaughter. And in order to justify his message of nonviolence, he had no other option but to preach against the injunctions of the Vedas. But of course, we shouldn't misunderstand this, and we see that Prabhupada is explaining that in the Vedas, why these ceremonies took place and in what yugas they took place. But through Lord Buddha's actions, in this way, the modern day injunction against meat eating was instituted. And since then, the animal sacrifice process was gradually stopped, although it still does happen in some places, unfortunately. So I will end with just one more quote by Srila Prabhupada, and this is from the purport of 4.2. 26.1. Even though one may be religiously inclined, animal sacrifice is recommended in the Shastras, not only in the Vedas, but even in the modern scriptures of other sects. And when such people kill animals, they can at least do it in the name of religion. However, when a religious system is transcendental, like the Vaishnava religion, there is no place for animal sacrifice. So, but on an ending note, just by following the principles of devotional service, we don't need to have any of these material sacrifices. And we should all try to rise to such a platform. And this is a platform where we are completely independent upon Krishna and completely following the four regulative principles, where we don't really have a need, like I said, for all these mundane material sacrifices. So, although we are going through the story of Daksha and Virabhadra right now, we see that Prabhupada still takes this opportunity to take a slight left turn and speak about animal sacrifices, non-violence, and the whole and what Vaishnava religion says about that. So I think that was a good thing to touch on, and I mainly focused on that. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm not at all qualified to speak, so I seek all your blessings, and please let me know if I made any shortcomings.